Hey, bullfrogs and all my friends that are reading with me this summer. How are y'all? I am so sorry that I did not read yesterday, like I said, but I hope that you enjoyed your July 4th holidays and enjoyed celebrating this wonderful country that we live in. So the last time we read, we ended off, I think we read 3 through 5. So today we're going to start with chapter 6. Remember, we're reading Merlin Mission number 11. This is our 4th chapter book of the summer. So we're going to start with chapter 6 and read several chapters and see what is happening with Jack and Annie. All right, so chapter 6, remember, is the title is Pea Soup. Have you ever tried pea soup? It's like green split peas. We'll see. Henry led Jack and Annie out of the sea lab, locking the door behind them. Then he led the way through the hall and down another flight of steep steps. In the faint light of the lower deck, Jack saw naval officers and scientists streaming through a door ahead. He, Annie, and Henry lined up behind them and filed into the wardroom. Still wearing their bulky life vests, Jack and Annie sat awkwardly on a long bench in front of a table. Many of the men, stared at them with curiosity. The professor smiled, but the captain did not look happy. "I thought our friends might join us for lunch, sir," Henry said to the captain. "I promise they will return to shore after the storm." "Very well," said the captain. "Immediately after the storm." "Aye, aye, sir," said Henry. He turned to the other officers at the table. "Gentlemen, may I introduce Annie and Jack from America? They are adventurous travelers." "Hi," murmured Jack and Annie. The officers and scientists nodded politely. Sailors in white uniforms acted as waiters, bringing plates and cups to the table. "What are we having for lunch?" Annie whispered to Henry. "The usual," said Henry, sighing. "Salted meat, pickles, dried biscuits." Ew. "This is not good," thought Jack. He was right. When he was served, he could hardly look at his food, much less eat it. He was thirsty, though, so he reached for the cup and took a long sip of water. Jack immediately spit the liquid back into his cup. It was unbelievably sour. He gagged and coughed. When he looked up, everyone was staring at him, including the captain. "Excuse me," Jack said, wiping his mouth. His face felt hot from embarrassment. "You just guzzled your lime juice, lad," said the professor. "Most of us take it in small sips." "Lime juice?" asked Annie. "Why?" "It prevents scurry," said the professor. "Every day we all drink a cup of lime juice for the vitamin C. Otherwise, we'd get sores and rotten teeth." "Yuck," said Annie. Henry smiled. "You won't get scurvy if you eat fruits and vegetables," he said. "But it is hard to keep vegetables and fruits fresh on board a ship." Jack couldn't think about eating or drinking anything at the moment. All of it, especially the pickles, made him feel even queasier. The rolling of the ship didn't help either. The waves seemed to be getting worse. He said to Henry. "They do indeed," said Henry. He turned and looked out at a small round window. "Can't see a thing. It's as thick as pea soup out there." "Oh no," Jack groaned to himself. "Please don't talk about pea soup." The ship lurched. Cups and plates slid across the table and crashed to the floor. Annie grabbed Jack as the ship rocked wildly. "Steady as she goes," said the captain. "It seems the storm is fully upon us," said the professor. The ship lurched again. More cups and plates slid off the table. Jack and Annie almost slid off their chairs, but without any sign of nervousness, the officers and scientists stood up and hurried out of the room, as if they knew just what to do in bad weather. "I'll take you down to the hold," Henry said to Jack and Annie. "We'll wait there until the waves calm down." The ship pitched violently as they stood up from the table, holding on to the back of their life vests. Henry steered Jack and Annie out of the wardroom. Jack nearly slipped on the wet floor. His bare feet crushed some soggy biscuits and pickles. He tried not to think about it. And here's a picture of all the chaos they were experiencing on that ship. Out in the dark hall, the wind howled down the stairwell from the top deck, spraying them all with ocean foam. "I must go secure my lab," Henry shouted to Jack and Annie. He pointed to the stairs. "Go down one more flight. I'll join you when I can." "We'll come with you," said Annie. "'Tis better to be safe," said Henry. "Follow the others quickly. I'll come soon." Henry unlocked the door to his lab and disappeared inside. "Come on, let's go down," said Jack. He grabbed Annie's hand and pulled her toward the stairwell. Officers and sailors were all heading down the steps ahead of them. Just as Jack and Annie started down, the ship lurched again. Jack's stomach lurched with it. He covered his mouth. "I am definitely going to be sick," he thought. He really didn't want to throw up on the stairs or in front of the captain and the others. "You go down. I'll be right there," Jack shouted to Annie. "Why, where are you going?" Annie yelled. "Just go down," said Jack. Then he whirled around and charged up 2 flights of steep steps to the top deck. When Jack stepped onto the deck, the rain was pounding. The wind was howling. The waves looked like dark mountains. Sea foam was blowing everywhere. Jack knew at once he'd made a mistake. Better to be embarrassed than drown, he thought. Just as he turned to go back down the stairs, Annie burst onto the deck. "Jack!" she cried. "What are you doing?" Jack forgot all about throwing up. "I made a mistake," he shouted. "We shouldn't be up here. Go down. I'm coming with you." "We have to go back down." He pushed Annie toward the stairwell. A giant wave crashed over the side of the ship. Jack fell and slid across the foam-covered deck. It was impossible to see anything. The wind was screaming. Jack tried to stand, but wearing his clumsy life vest, he couldn't get back on his feet. Jack finally hauled himself up, but just as he did, another giant wave broke over the side of the ship. The ship rolled again, and Jack fell to his knees. Another wave crashed over the deck. Jack was swept up by the foamy water and tossed overboard into the churning sea. There's Jack. All right, chapter 7 is called Help, with an exclamation mark, "Help!" Jack plunged down into the sea. The water was freezing cold. He bobbed back up to the surface, choking and coughing. The life vest kept Jack afloat, but the waves kept hammering him. "Help!" Jack shouted. Thoughts of the 20-foot tiger shark and the mysterious monster shot through his mind. "Help! Help!" he screamed. Jack heard someone else screaming, "Help!" It was Annie. She'd been washed off the ship too. Jack flailed his arms and kicked his legs, trying to get to Annie. A wave lifted her up and tossed her toward him. But just as Jack reached for her hand, another wave pushed her past him, out of reach. "The wand, Jack!" Annie shouted. "Use the wand!" The wand, Jack thought. The wand of Dianthus. Where was it? In his backpack? He didn't have his backpack. Where was his backpack? "Jack, the wand!" Annie yelled. "I don't have it," Jack shouted. His voice was lost in the roar of the storm. Jack kept flailing and kicking, trying to reach Annie again. Jack felt his cork life vest coming loose. Another wave crashed over him, and one side of the vest slipped off his arm. Jack clutched the vest, trying to keep it on, but the waters kept pulling and tugging. The sea itself now seemed like a monster. As Jack desperately fought the water, he saw another life vest floating free on the waves. It was Annie's. Where was she? "Annie!" Jack screamed as he looked around his lost flight with the sea. A wave washed his vest right off of him. Then another wave crashed down on his head and pushed him down into the deep. Jack held his breath as he plunged through the black water. He thrashed his arms and kicked his legs, trying to get back to the surface. His head popped above the waves, and he took one deep gulp of air before another wave washed over him, and he went under again. Jack kept kicking and trying to swim, but the fight to get back to the surface was too great. Just when he was about to run out of air, he felt something curl around his waist. Then he felt himself being lifted toward the surface. Jack's head popped above the water again. He opened his mouth and gasped for air. The waves were swirling and foamy, but Jack kept his head above them. Something around his waist was holding him up. Jack couldn't think at first. He was trying too hard to breathe. But then he saw something spreading across the water near him. It looked like a giant gray umbrella with dark spots all over it. Rising from the center of the umbrella was a huge, rounded head. It had yellow eyes with black pupils. Stretching out from the umbrella were tentacles, lots of tentacles, all connected by a thick web with double rows of suckers on each one. A giant octopus, Jack thought with horror. It was much bigger than the octopus they'd seen a long time ago, and this time a tentacle of the huge creature was curling around his waist. "Help!" Jack shrieked. He tried to pull himself free of the thick, rubbery arm. The giant octopus held him tightly. Jack looked around wildly. Where was Annie? All right, here's a picture. Can you see where Annie is? She's also wrapped up. See him? Crazy. Jack! Annie shouted. Jack saw her. One of the octopus tentacles had lifted Annie above the surface of the water, too. Jack's relief at seeing Annie was matched with his terror. "We're caught!" he cried. "Try to escape!" Jack kept trying to break free from the huge tentacle. But the more he fought, the tighter the grip of the octopus became. "Don't fight him, Jack!" Annie yelled. "He's rescuing us!" Jack couldn't think straight. Was she crazy? "He'll strangle us and pull us back under," he shouted. "We have to fight him." "No," shouted Annie. "You're wrong. Can't you see he's saving us from drowning?" "He is?" thought Jack. Jack tried not to panic. The octopus arm around his middle felt firm, but he could tell that it wasn't trying to strangle him. It actually felt like it was hugging him, circling him like an inner tube, holding him above the water. Jack saw the creature's huge yellow eyes fixed on him. As Jack stared back into his eyes, he knew what Annie was saying was true. The creature wasn't trying to hurt him. Instead, the octopus looked concerned. He looked curious, too, and even a little shy. Staring back into the eyes of the octopus, Jack found himself smiling. As he and Annie kept bobbing up and down in the arms of the octopus, all of Jack's fear vanished. This was the weirdest rescue he'd ever experienced. "Hi, you," Annie said to the octopus. "We come in peace." Jack felt so dazed he started laughing. Annie laughed too. Even the octopus looked amused. Their laughter was interrupted by the blare of a horn. Jack heard men shrieking and shouting. He looked up and saw the HMS Challenger heading toward them. All right, so Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is called Monster of the Deep. All right, here we go. Sailors were on the top deck. They were yelling and pointing. The giant octopus loosened his hold on Jack and Annie. "The ship!" Jack gurgled before slipping under the water. His head popped back up. "Swim to the ship!" he shouted to Annie. Jack and Annie started swimming. The sky was still covered with clouds and the sea was still rough. But arm over arm they swam until they got close to the ladder on the side of the ship. "Ahoy!" someone shouted from above. Jack looked up and saw Henry and the professor standing at the top of the ladder. "Climb up!" yelled Henry. "Hurry, children, hurry!" cried the professor, "before it comes back." Jack swam as fast as he could to the ladder. He and Annie got there at the same time. They pulled themselves onto the ladder and climbed. When they reached the top, Henry and the professor helped them onto the deck. Henry wrapped wool blankets around them. "Thank goodness you are saved," said the professor. I thought you were below in the hold," said Henry. "How did you end up in the water?" "The storm, the waves," gasped Jack, shivering. Goodness gracious. "The waves threw us overboard," said Annie. "Why were you up on deck?" said Henry. I was seasick," said Jack. "I followed Jack and big waves came crashing down and washed us into the water," said Annie. "Our life vests saved us at first," said Jack, "but then they came off." "Then the octopus saved us," said Annie. "That monster saved you?" asked the professor. No, not a monster," said Jack. "A giant octopus." "Yes, the monster of the deep. I do not think it saved you, my boy," said the professor. "It is a miracle it did not eat you and your sister alive." No, he's not a monster. He didn't try to do any of that," said Jack. "He did save us," said Annie. "He held us up above the water." "Really?" Really, said Jack. "He kept us from drowning, and then he got scared away by the ship." "We didn't even thank him, Jack," said Annie. "We didn't say goodbye." Jack and Annie looked back at the water. "Hey, what's going on over there?" said Annie. She pointed to the rear of the ship. Sailors were facing the sea, yelling and shouting. "What are they yelling at?" Annie asked. Jack and Annie threw off their blankets and took off across the deck. They saw Joe and Tommy standing at the edge of the crowd. "What are they doing?" Annie yelled. "What's going on?" "They snared it in the net," shouted Tommy. "We've caught the beast at last," shouted Joe. "Caught it?" Annie looked at Jack. "Come on," Jack cried. He and Annie pushed their way through the crowd. "Children, stop!" the professor shouted, hurrying after them. "Don't get in the way!" But Jack and Annie squeezed through the crowd of sailors and scientists until they got to the railing of the ship. They looked down. The giant octopus was tangled in a net. His arms were churning the seawater into foam. His body had turned bright red. A cloud of dark ink billowed around him. "You're hurting him!" yelled Annie. "Leave him alone!" "Move away!" yelled a sailor. All right, here's a picture. So here's see the ink coming out? There's the big ship. He's in a net. Some of the sailors were yelling mean things at the octopus. Others seemed terrified. Even the captain was caught up in the panic. "Stand back," he shouted. "It could be powerful enough to sink the ship." "That's crazy," yelled Jack. "Leave him alone." "Its tentacles are as hard as steel," shouted one of the sailors. "No, they're not," cried Annie. "They're soft. They saved us from drowning." But everyone kept shouting, "Hungry for human flesh. Devour a man in one bite. Thirsty for blood." "He's not any of those things," yelled Annie. "Throw the harpoons," yelled a sailor. "Get your axes, swords, and knives," yelled another. "Ready the guns," said the captain. "No!" screamed Annie. "No!" roared Jack. "The children are right," shouted the professor. He and Henry had squeezed through the crowd too. They were standing back behind Jack and Annie. Jack felt a rush of relief. "The professor says we're right," yelled Annie. "Do not destroy it, Captain," roared the professor. "Haul it on board." "On board?" said Jack. "Capture it alive and whole," said the professor. His eyes gleamed. "So we can study it." No, no, let him go, said Jack. Just let him swim away and be free. Please, screamed Annie, let him go. But neither the professor nor the captain seemed to hear Jack and Annie. They were too busy arguing over what to do with the giant octopus. We must kill it, Professor, said the captain. It could grab the hull and drag the ship down to the bottom. But science needs it alive, said the professor. At least till we have examined it. By now the octopus had gathered his long arms around himself as if for protection. Annie burst into tears. Henry, help him, she sobbed. Don't let them kill him or capture him. Henry looked upset too. Excuse me, sirs, he shouted. Excuse me. The girl is right. We should let him go. But no one listened to Henry either. Jack, cried Annie. She grabbed Jack. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. Save him. We have to save him. What can we do? We've tried everything, said Jack. Then he remembered. His own words helped him remember, and Jack knew exactly what to do. All right, so that's where we're going to end today. Tomorrow we'll pick up at chapter 9 called Think, Think. So I hope that you enjoyed those 3 chapters. Thank you again for being patient, and we just had some family things going on, and everything's good now. But I needed to be with them last Friday, I guess. And then the week after that was just July 4th and everything else. And we had family all here. So anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed this book, and we will finish it tomorrow. We will read the last 2 chapters. And then I will let you know tomorrow what our new book is going to be, that will start chapter 1 through 2 or 3 on the next day. So I hope that you're having a great summer and getting ready for your next grade coming up, and that you are reading every day something, so you are ready to go in August when we go back to school. I love y'all, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.